It was the morning they posted a flyer to demolish my barn. The same morning I found my late uncle's army folder under a box of mothballs and ration kits. Names Walter Green. 63, retired ag engineer. The porch board still creaked under the autumn cold, and that old brass survey compass in my pocket, it hadn't pointed north in years, but it still meant home. How far can one clipboard-wielding neighbor push a man before the ground itself pushes back? Walter Green spotted the yellow flyer flapping on his front gate like a warning flag. Non-compliant structures subject to inspection. The wind hadn't been strong that morning, but the corners of the paper curled sharply like it had clawed its way into place overnight. Walter stared at it for a long moment before unpinning the single staple dug into his cedar post. He rubbed the spot it left behind with his thumb as if he could erase the intrusion. The barn stood just a few yards beyond, same as it had since the 50s. His father built it with help from 2 neighbors back when a handshake settled most disputes. By the time Walter set the kettle on for coffee, the flyer lay open on the kitchen table beside a folded local paper and a plate of cinnamon toast he hadn't touched. The wording was clinical. Cottonwood Ridge, HOA, compliance notice. Effective October 1st. Properties with unapproved structures will be subject to mandatory review and potential removal. No name, no contact. Just the hollow signature board enforcement division. Walter sipped his coffee, slowly scanning the document again, half hoping a signature might magically appear. The barn had been here longer than the HOA itself. It wasn't even in the subdivision proper. His ranch sat just past the last row of cul-de-sacs where paved streets gave way to gravel shoulders and wild mesquites. But lines had a way of shifting when folks with clipboards got involved. At Wally's Cafe, the smell of fried eggs and bacon clung to the wooden booths like old stories. Walter slid into his usual spot by the window, the flyer folded in his shirt pocket. Evelyn Reyes looked up from her crossword and narrowed her eyes before he said a word. "You've got that 'they took my parking spot' face," she muttered, drawing a line between 9 down and 12 across. Walter handed her the flyer without a word. She read it once, then again slower. Her brow didn't furrow. It settled like she'd been expecting it. "Damn it," she said softly. Same font, same paper stock. That's how she started with the Johnsons. Flyer, first bulldozer, later. Walter raised an eyebrow. Karen Bellevue." "Yeah," Evelyn said, tapping the flyer. "Back when I was secretary, she got the HOA to redraw the boundary lines to include Johnson's chicken coop. Claimed it was visible from the new cul-de-sac. You know what happened next. They tore it down and moved out. She can't touch the barn," Walter said. "It's older than the HOA." Evelyn took a long sip of her coffee. That won't stop her. Not if she thinks it spoils the view from the model homes. Lorna's got a real taste for aesthetic uniformity. She just hides it behind iced coffee and fake concern. A few stools down, Jerry Caldwell leaned over with a mutter. "You hear about the dues going up again? 3%, someone else chimed in. Said it's for beautification. I say it's for Lorna's landscaping addiction." Walter sat back and listened, the quiet murmur of neighbors fanning the first embers of something he hadn't felt in years, disquiet. Not fear, not yet, but a loosening of the ground beneath him like the fence posts he once reset after spring floods. "Evelyn," he said, after a moment, "you still have access to those old board minutes I do. And copies. You think I trusted them to keep records clean?" She stuffed the flyer into her purse and stood up. "I'll dig. If Lorna's planning something, we'll find it." He nodded slowly. "Appreciate it." As he walked back to his truck, Walter caught sight of his reflection in the cafe window, creased but still solid. He looked like a man who'd hoped for a quiet retirement. Someone who mended fences, not fought zoning battles. The drive home passed under a sky dipped in amber. The mesquites along the fence line swayed lightly, their pods whispering in dry rhythm. When he pulled into the drive, his boot barely hit gravel before he noticed it new flags. Thin, orange survey markers spaced every few feet along his west fence. Fresh. The ground hadn't even settled where they'd been pushed in. Some still bore flecks of the surveyor's boot prints. He followed the markers slowly, hand in his pocket, fingers curling. They formed a tight boundary around the barn like a noose. That evening, as the light dimmed and the cicadas struck up their chorus, Walter sat on the porch flyer beside him, mug refilled. His phone buzzed. He almost didn't answer. Evelyn's voice came through tight. "Lorna just added your barn to the HOA meeting agenda next week. She's moving fast." The folding chairs were lined up like soldiers, and Lorna stood at the front like a general about to declare war. The HOA lodge hadn't changed in decades. Same scuffed linoleum floor, same humming fluorescent lights. The air smelled of lemon disinfectant, trying in vain to mask old coffee and older frustrations. Framed photographs of local veterans lined the side wall, their faded smiles locked in place as if bracing for another kind of battle. Walter walked in just before the hour, property deed tucked neatly in a folder under his arm. Evelyn was already seated near the back, a thick binder on her lap and reading glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't speak at first, but her lips moved as he passed barely audible. Same room, same playbook. Just a new target. The board members took their seats like schoolchildren summoned to a principal's office. 4 of them, all neighbors of various levels of involvement. None looked particularly eager to be there. Lorna Bellevue tapped the microphone at the front table twice, her clipboard resting beside a tall iced coffee, sweating condensation onto the HOA bylaws. "Let's begin," she said crisply. First, a motion to approve last month's minutes. A hand or two lifted lazily. Walter sat still observing. "We'll now move to new business." Lorna continued. "As of this week, per Article 4, subsection B, we've implemented the Emergency Inspection Protocol. Under this authority, I'm introducing a motion to review the non-compliant structure located at 440 Mesa Ridge, the Green Property Barn, for potential removal or compliance modification." The room didn't react so much as sink inward. Walter stood, slowly measured voice calm but resolute. "My barn predates the HOA by nearly 3 decades, he said. "Here's the property deed and copies of county zoning exceptions from 1972. Lorna didn't look at the papers. "The structure lies within current HOA borders. That makes it subject to aesthetic review and safety inspection. The emergency protocol was passed Monday evening during a special board session." "I didn't receive notice of that meeting," Walter replied. "It was for executive board members only. Standard clause under Section 6. He glanced across the table at the board. 2 of the members shifted uneasily, avoiding eye contact. One cleared his throat but said nothing. "Vote now," Lorna said flatly. Evelyn rose from her seat. "Madam Chair, I request to speak on this matter. As former secretary, I have documentation on prior precedent public comments come after board motions." Lorna snapped without turning. "We're mid-vote." Walter turned slightly, meeting Evelyn's gaze. She nodded once hands tightening on her binder. One by one, the board raised hands, 3 in favor, 2 abstained. No one opposed. "The motion passes," Lorna declared. "The inspection will be conducted within 72 hours. Property owner must provide full access." Walter didn't respond. He collected his folder, nodded to the room, and walked toward the exit. The hallway beyond the meeting room was dim, lined with corkboards plastered in faded community event posters, pancake breakfasts, lost cat flyers, yard sales from summers past. As he pushed through the double doors, he heard a voice behind him, low and weary. "This again." Jared's tone was unmistakable. Walter paused, but didn't turn. The door clicked shut behind him. At 6:12 a.m., the trail camera caught a figure stepping into the barn. Not an animal, a person, carrying bolt cutters. The footage played back in cold gray pixels, timestamp blinking in the corner. Walter paused it just before the figure passed under the cedar beam archway, tall clipped stride, familiar posture. She wore a windbreaker and a wide-brimmed hat, but the way she moved was unmistakable. Lorna Bellevue. Even in grainy night mode, her clipboard arm swung with robotic confidence. He stared at the screen a moment longer before closing the laptop and setting it aside. The coffee in his mug had gone cold. Outside, fog clung low over the mesquites, their branches holding droplets like tiny lanterns. He slipped on his boots, jaw set. The barn door was open 2 inches when he stepped outside, just enough to catch the wind and creak. He hadn't left it like that. Inside, dust floated in shafts of morning light spilling between the slats. The rake that always hung left of the door now leaned against the feed barrel prongs upward. Walter picked it up, brushed off hay, and rehung it. The air smelled off not rotten, just disturbed. As he circled the exterior, he spotted something flapping at the far fence, a length of red and white plastic tape caught on a bent nail. It read, HOA, inspection pending. The stake it had been attached to lay snapped nearby, the plastic fluttering like a torn flag. He'd just returned to the porch when he saw the old station wagon coming up the drive. Evelyn stepped out holding a Tupperware of muffins in one hand and a rolled-up bundle of papers in the other. "They're still warm," she said, then added, "You look like you didn't sleep. I didn't." Walter led her inside and opened the laptop again. The footage played without sound, but Evelyn's reaction didn't need it. She leaned in close, squinting. "That's her," she said, "even without the clipboard. That walk? It's burned into my nightmares." She entered without permission. "Cut the lock went through my tools. You need to file a report." Walter looked away. "To who? HOA Sheriff's Department." "They'll say it's a misunderstanding. Inspectors sometimes come early on official visits." Evelyn pulled out a faded HOA zoning map from her stack. "This isn't just nuisance anymore, it's encroachment. She's moving fast. We need to get ahead of her." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the porch and looked out toward the barn. The fog was lifting. For a moment, the light hit the rafters just right, the same angle as the photo his father had taken in '68. He closed his eyes and tried to picture it unbroken. That afternoon passed in uneasy quiet. Walter tightened the barn locks, moved some equipment inside the house. He didn't check the camera again. Just after sundown, a knock came at the back screen door. Not the front, only a neighbor would use the back. Jared Bellevue stood on the steps, hands in jacket pockets, face drawn. He looked younger somehow, like a boy caught sneaking cigarettes behind the schoolhouse. In his right hand he held a silver flash drive. "I didn't see anything," he said. I found something." Walter stepped aside. Jared walked in slowly, as though unsure whether he was still welcome. They sat at the kitchen table. Evelyn had returned earlier with a thermos of warm cider and 2 mismatched mugs. One now sat untouched beside Jared's hand. Walter plugged in the flash drive. A folder blinked open. Inside, a series of PDFs, subject lines clipped but readable. Phase 2, border realignments, HOA, executive notes. Private, do not archive notice. Federal overlay, parcel conflict, urgent. He scrolled, pausing at a highlighted section. Parcel 17B presents obstacles. Recommend quiet removal prior to deptemage of interior review. He sat back. His breath was shallow. Jared didn't look at him. She knows she crossed a line, but this line. It's not hers to cross. Buried beneath mothballs and Vietnam-era ration kits, Walter found the box his uncle told him never to lose. The attic smelled like cedar old paper and time. Dust motes floated in the slanted light pouring through the small window near the roof peak. Walter crouched low, pushing aside a plastic Christmas wreath and a stack of yellowed Farm and Ranch monthly magazines before he spotted a rusted green footlocker wedged beneath a canvas duffel and a folded American flag. He brushed off the top gently. The latch creaked as it opened, revealing bundles of papers tied with twine, a laminated military ID, and a sealed folder with the stamp USDA Perimeter Program. Parcel 17B. A slip of paper tucked inside bore a note in faded ballpoint. "Keep this with the barn. It explains more than I ever could." Walter sat back on his heels, the folder in his lap. His uncle had served in the late 40s, part of a domestic perimeter observation initiative that blurred the line between agriculture and reconnaissance. The documents inside were dry bureaucratic but unmistakable. His barn, had been constructed using funds from a 1951 grant designed to support strategic rural outposts near rail corridors. It was a structure of record. Not just timber, it was quite literally paperwork. He thumbed through letters with military letterhead, some addressed to his uncle, others to the county zoning board. One bore a seal from the Department of Agriculture. The language was firm: permanent exemption from municipal redesignation. Parcel 17B, to remain in federal jurisdiction unless revoked by departmental order. No revocation followed. Later that afternoon, Walter brought the folder down to Evelyn's place, setting it gently on her back porch table next to a pitcher of sweet tea. She leaned over the pages, reading through a pair of bifocals that slipped to the edge of her nose. "Well, I'll be," she said. "You know, there's a clause in the HOA Charter Section 8, if I remember right. It excludes federal parcels. We always thought it was just formality. Guess it wasn't." Walter sipped his tea. "She's building a case on land that doesn't legally belong to the HOA." Evelyn tapped a sheet. And if she knew about this, she was warned. Jared said, stepping onto the porch with hesitant steps. He held out a flash drive. Meeting notes from 2019. HOA legal counsel flagged Parcel 17B as a red zone. Said to steer clear. Lorna dismissed it, said it was obsolete Cold War junk. Evelyn snorted. Obsolete or not, it's federal. They spent the next hour organizing papers matching zoning overlays with old blueprints, Evelyn cross-referencing map coordinates with dates. Jared sat quietly most of the time, occasionally pointing out a detail in the HOA language or offering context. His posture had changed. Less defensive, more involved. That evening, Walter printed a formal complaint addressed to the Department of the Interior. He included high-resolution images from the trail camera copies of the 1951 grant documentation and excerpts from the HOA's meeting notes. He enclosed the letter in a certified envelope signed across the seal and dropped it off at the post office just before closing. 3 days passed in relative stillness. The barn remained untouched. Lorna hadn't sent any further notices. Walter spent the mornings raking leaves and fixing the front gate, half waiting for something to shift. On the third afternoon, Evelyn stood watering her mums when 2 black SUVs rolled slowly through the main road into Cottonwood Ridge. No logos, just dark glass and out-of-state plates. She turned off the hose, pulled off her gloves, and squinted toward the curve in the street. "Well, I'll be," she murmured. They really came. Agent Lamar didn't look like a bureaucrat. He looked like someone who hated wasting time. He stood on Walter's porch with a file tucked under one arm and a small badge case in the other. Next to him, Agent Nadine Holt nodded politely, her expression unreadable beneath dark sunglasses. Their car, one of the black SUVs Evelyn had spotted, waited at the edge of the gravel drive like it had grown roots. Mr. Green Lamar said, extending a hand. "Agent Cody Lamar. Department of the Interior. This is Agent Holt. We received your packet." Walter returned the handshake with a quiet nod. "Come on in." They sat at the kitchen table where Walter had already laid out the documents in neat rows, barn schematics, parcel records, the footage still paused on his laptop screen. Lamar scanned each paper with a practiced eye, flipping pages like they offended him by existing. Holt asked most of the questions, dates, clarifications, where he got the records. Walter answered steadily the way he used to deliver field reports at the co-op. No embellishments, just the facts. "Who placed the inspection tape?" Lamar asked. "No idea," Walter said, but it wasn't anyone with authority. By mid-morning, they'd thanked him, packed up the folder, and driven 2 miles down to the HOA office without calling ahead. The place was aggressively cheerful: walls, painted pastel blue shelves crammed with novelty mugs, and a framed sign behind the desk that read, "Civility builds communities." Lorna stood behind the counter clipboard at the ready, and a brittle smile plastered across her face. "We weren't expecting guests," she said, voice thin. "We don't schedule compliance audits," Lamar replied. "We observe." Holt presented a request for records, formal sealed and logged. Lorna hesitated just a second too long before gesturing to a locked filing cabinet. Of course. Just routine paperwork. In the corner, Jared Bellevue watched silently from a chair, flipping through an HOA newsletter, but not turning a page. He didn't greet his mother. Evelyn arrived not long after, toting a grocery bag and an old cardboard binder. "Brought lunch," she said sweetly. And, "Oh, dear, is this the wrong folder? Thought it was recipes." She pulled out a ledger marked Event Budget Q4 and laid it on the desk. Lamar blinked once. "Ma'am, may I?" Evelyn smiled. "You go right ahead." Inside, a breakdown of community beautification expenses, line items for uplighting engraved signs, and a curious notation: temporary staging for HOA expansion site. Parcel 17B, $3,200. Jared stood abruptly. "Excuse me," he said, and walked out, brushing past Walter in the hallway. Outside, he handed Walter a flash drive. "Same one I copied for the county," he muttered. "Search for Private Initiative Expansion, Border Realignment Plan." The agents returned to their vehicle, parked just long enough to print and tape a laminated sheet to the HOA office window. Notice: all HOA activity suspended pending federal compliance review. Section 11. Zoning Violation. Inside, silence settled like dust. The board members didn't speak. Lorna stared at the sign, lips trembling. "This town's gone soft," she barked, slamming her clipboard on the reception desk. Papers scattered. The door snapped shut behind her. Later that evening, Evelyn sat with Walter and the agents on her patio, handing out peach cobbler in paper bowls. "For doing the Lord's paperwork," she said dryly. Holt accepted hers with a nod. Lamar took a second slice. Down by the community garden, Jared was pulling weeds alone, sleeves rolled up, face set to work. No one had asked him to. He just kept digging. Neighbors opened their blinds to find Lorna pacing her lawn in pajama pants and pearls, shouting about barn propaganda. It was just after 7, and the sunlight still stretched low across Maple Court, casting long shadows over the remaining Halloween decorations. Drooping plastic spiders, a half-collapsed ghost, and a deflated pumpkin that now resembled a shriveled peach. Lorna's voice rose above the stillness, echoing off vinyl siding and chain-link fences. "This is a targeted smear campaign," she yelled, brandishing a sheaf of printed HOA bylaws in one hand and a megaphone in the other. The megaphone sputtered, let out a shrill beep, and promptly died. She banged it twice, then tried again. "They're erasing years of civic order." The only response was the quiet creak of blinds lifting from across the street. Walter, already dressed in a crisp plaid shirt and jeans, walked past her driveway with a to-go mug of coffee in hand. He gave a polite nod. "Morning, Lorna." She spun toward him, finger pointed like a bayonet. "This isn't over, Walter Green." He didn't pause. At Wally's Cafe, the talk buzzed soft but steady. Evelyn sat at her usual corner booth, sipping chamomile and offering small nods as neighbors drifted in. The community was subtle about it, but the tide had shifted. People used to whisper when Lorna passed by. Now they whispered when she didn't. Only 3 people had shown up to Lorna's impromptu Save the Standards protest. 2 were HOA retirees who left after realizing there wouldn't be snacks. The third was a teenager who thought it was a yard sale. By mid-morning, the board had assembled in the lodge room. The fluorescent lights hummed a dull companion to the tension settling in the chairs. The federal agents, seated quietly at the back, observed without a word. Walter sat in the gallery. Jared, standing at the front, cleared his throat. "My name's Jared Bellevue," he began, eyes fixed not on his mother but on the rows of printed documents in front of him. "I served as HOA tech coordinator, and for too long I enabled decisions I didn't agree with." He paused. No one interrupted. What started as zoning enforcement turned into personal targeting. We ignored boundaries, legal and moral. I failed to speak up until it was too late, but I won't stay silent now. A board member, Mrs. Nguyen, lifted her hand. "I move that we proceed with the motion regarding Ms. Bellevue's standing." The vote was swift. 3 in favor. 1 abstained. Lorna, absent and unaware, had been officially removed from all HOA positions under the violation clause. Outside, the street was quiet. Lorna had retreated inside her house, curtains drawn. A neighbor walked past and gently pulled the Bellevue 4 HOA sign from their lawn, setting it beside the garbage with care. At sunset, Evelyn found a cream-colored envelope tucked in her mailbox. Inside, a letter from the town clerk handwritten on official stationery. Dear Ms. Reyes and Mr. Green, in light of recent leadership vacancies and your exemplary community stewardship, we kindly request your service as interim co-chairs of the Cottonwood Ridge Homeowners Association. She let out a low whistle and walked up the road to Walter's place letter in hand. On his porch, a small bottle of maple syrup sat waiting. No note. Just Jared's silent, sweet apology glinting in the last light of the day. Walter never thought he'd sit at the head of a table again, especially not one with the HOA logo etched in oak. The meeting hall smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner and fresh paper. The walls, once cluttered with plaques commemorating past presidents, now bore a single bulletin board with pinned flyers: Community Bake Sale Garden Cleanup, Open Mic Night. Change had a quieter look than Walter expected. He adjusted his reading glasses and glanced around the room. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, not stiff and silent like before, but murmuring, easily nodding to each other. Someone had brought donuts. Someone else had put out a carafe of decaf and a bowl of sugar cubes. Evelyn sat to his left, her old binder now relabeled in tidy block print, People First. She caught his eye and offered a wink. Better than rules and procedures, don't you think? Walter chuckled. Much. A soft rap of the gavel, a formality Evelyn insisted on, and the meeting began. Our first order of business, Walter said, voice steady, is to confirm the interim council. No objections. A show of hands unanimous. Second, Evelyn added, we'd like to propose that the Barn Review Committee be dissolved, effective immediately. Laughter rolled gently through the room. No one missed that committee. Jared raised his hand, standing with a small folder under one arm. I'd like to submit a draft budget, he said, for a shared tool shed next to the community garden, and funds for restoring the benches by the north path. Heads nodded. Evelyn made a quick note. Walter leaned forward. All budget decisions will be posted publicly. Minutes, too. No more whisper meetings. Someone from the back, Mrs. Hill from Sycamore Lane, clapped softly. Others joined. After the vote passed, Walter looked down at the agenda, then back up. I'd like to close today with a thought. He stood, adjusting the cuffs of his flannel shirt. The late morning sun filtered through the high windows, casting soft squares of light on the floor. This job isn't about power, he said. It's about stewardship. About watching over what we love, not because we want to control it, but because we care enough not to look away. We protect this place by protecting each other. Silence settled gently. Not heavy, just full. Later that afternoon, Evelyn hosted cider on her vineyard patio. Mason jars, clinked cinnamon donuts disappeared fast, and neighbors lingered long past the first chill of dusk. To second chances, she toasted, raising her glass, and no more clipboards at sunrise. As the gathering wound down, Walter returned home to find a thick envelope resting in his mailbox. Inside, a letter on formal stationery from the Department of the Interior. Dear Mr. Green, we are pleased to inform you that the structure designated as Parcel 17B has been approved for historic federal recognition. A plaque will be issued in the coming weeks for display at the original site. Walter read it twice, then once more. Across the street, a moving truck idled outside Lorna's house. No signs, no fuss, just cardboard boxes and a clipped hedge. No one waved, no one stopped. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the edges of the flag on Walter's porch. He didn't salute this time, just nodded to it once, quiet, respectful, and went inside. The new plaque gleamed like a second sun as Walter screwed it gently into the barn's weathered front post. It caught the late afternoon light, just so casting a soft reflection against the faded cedar planks. The words, etched in brass, were simple, reverent observation parcel 17 Bestamille. 1947. Historical Stewardship Site. Walter stepped back and brushed his hand along the grain, the ridges of the wood cool beneath his palm. Beyond the fence, the field behind the barn had been transformed. Hay bales arranged into makeshift benches circled small fire pits. Rows of homemade banners fluttered above food tables, apple pie, roasted corn, cranberry preserves, and baked beans simmering in cast iron. The smell of cinnamon and dry leaves hung in the crisp Thanksgiving week air. Kids darted between booths Jared had built from scrap lumber and care. There was a beanbag toss against the pie table and even a little ring toss over wine bottles Evelyn had repurposed from her vineyard cellar. She floated between parents and elders with her cider ladle offering warm smiles and gentle refills. Elder neighbors sat under a white tent swapping stories that leapt back to the 50s and 60s long drives in station wagons harvest seasons and a neighbor named Fred who once fixed radios for the whole block. Laughter rang easily with no trace of the recent tensions. No one mentioned Lorna. Her name floated only as a footnote, a phase the neighborhood had passed through like a storm that never quite broke the fence. Walter moved through it all slowly, receiving nods, handshakes, the occasional shoulder squeeze from someone who'd kept their distance until now. He didn't need words for most of them. He just listened. As sunset pulled a gold curtain across the pasture, the music shifted, classic country twanging softly from a pair of old speakers strung up near the cider table. The lights, little paper lanterns hung on twine, blinked on one by one. Walter stepped up on a flat hay bale and raised his cider jar. "I never thought this barn would mean much to anyone but me," he said. "But maybe it's never just about timber and nails. Maybe it's about what we keep fixing, what we choose to preserve. Maybe it's about showing up when it's easier to stay quiet." A hush fell over the gathering, not solemn, just full. We don't always get to stop the storms, but we can sure choose which structures we keep repairing. They toasted Mug's jars, even one thermos lid lifted toward him. As the crowd drifted into the night, Walter stayed behind to tidy. Evelyn helped gather lantern cords while Jared raked up a few stray wrappers. Before they left, Jared reached into his coat and handed Walter a small box. Inside, a black and white photo restored and carefully framed. The barn, bright and proud in 1948, with Walter's uncle leaning against the post and a military jeep parked nearby. The date scrawled in pencil on the back. Walter didn't say anything for a long time. He just placed the photo on the window ledge inside the barn. Later, after everyone had gone and the last thermos had been rinsed, Walter turned off the single barn light. The field stretched quiet before him, still dotted with the warmth of cooling lanterns. In the distance, the American flag swayed gently, catching the last breath of November. Some structures stand through storms, not because they're strong, but because someone kept repairing them. The field behind the barn had once been quiet, but now it echoed with stories, laughter, and the soft rustle of shared purpose. What began as a flyer turned into a reckoning, and a reminder that rules, when bent to serve control, must be straightened by community hands. Walter didn't seek leadership, but sometimes peace is preserved not by silence, but by steady voices at the table. Like the beams of an old barn, it's not the age or origin that matters most, but the people willing to keep it standing.